That took way too long to set this stuff up. So what we're going to do is this. I'm going to kind of pick up where we left off, kind of walking through what we did last class, as well as talk a little bit more about some of the muscular structure that makes up the human torso, as well as give you a couple little tips and tricks. Think about it this way, right? Whenever we first were learning how to draw the human face, right, we did go through all the same processes. We talked about the skull, talked about kind of the muscles and the meat and stuff that sits on top of the skull and where your eyeballs fit. And we played with kneaded eraser, really thought about the structure and sculpture of the skull. Now, I don't expect you guys to sit and literally sculpt every single time. That would be crazy. And I definitely don't expect you to draw someone's portrait and have to sit down and think about where their skull is and then like draw that out. And then think about where the muscle is and draw that out. That would take too long, right? But having this kind of strong comprehension of what the human skull looks like underneath all this meat and goop is really, really beneficial whenever it comes to adding shading, right? Instead of these shadows just like being, just kind of floating on our face, you can say, oh, there's a shadow underneath the cheekbone, that zygomatic process, which kind of protrudes right there, right? You'll start to kind of see, almost X-ray vision style, where these shadows kind of fall across the actual face. So we're going to do that same kind of process with the overall human. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to kind of sketch on the side here real quick. So what we're going to do is this. I've got my little weird figure dude sitting right here. Last time we went through, we started thinking about kind of where the rib cage is, right? And we talked about how the rib cage itself, if you imagine kind of from ballpark, kind of say the bottom of the torso, right? Imagine I'm just slicing things here. But the bottom of the torso to kind of the top of the torso, right? This whole trunk right here. If I were to just slice this right in half, without even looking, I didn't even look at your picture, just going to slice it right in half. I know that's about where his rib cage is versus where his guts are, right? All his intestines. We talk about his lower intestine and all that stuff, his small and large intestine. So we've got all that information in here, right? Just automatically, it's in the half. Just know that. Next step. Even though we did talk about the importance of the fact that we have those kind of coastal spaces, the gaps between our ribs, we talked last class about how it's important that we have those so we can kind of stretch and bend and breathe, right? If it was a solid hunk of bone, then it wouldn't let us do that, right? However, whenever you're drawing, I'd highly suggest to completely do the opposite of what I taught you last class. Instead, physically imagine this like a big hunk of bone, right? Just one big solid piece. Because here's the thing. If I can imagine this, even though it's clearly not, I can imagine this as kind of one big solid hunk of bone, right? This kind of almost like a shield of bone covering my lungs and heart and everything. If I can imagine that, what happens is this. A lot of times we tend to draw things, let's say we're doing some crazy, outlandish angle whenever someone's stretching or something like that. And let's say you're trying to draw them, so you bend them, right? And here's like their legs, this is horrible. And here's their arms over here, he's like picking this guy's nose and his head's right here, right? So he's stretching, right? Okay, that's horrible. All right, so but this kind of motion here, the problem we run into whenever you have this motion specifically for the trunk, right? The problem that you run into is your ribs don't bend like that. That's not a thing. Right? Your ribs are bone, they're solid, right? Just like your head, your cranium, your skull doesn't bend, it's bone, right? So the problem that we run into is this is actually very, very straight. This is actually very, very stiff and kind of hard. This looks like a soup can, but that's very, very stiff and straight. It's your guts that do all the bending, right? No matter which way you bend, forward, backward, left, right, you're always going to end up with one side that's really, really stretched, and then ergo the other side that's really crunched, right? And that happens every time. So, for example, look how low, and I know this is horrible, but look how low this guy's leg is, right? What's actually going to happen is this side is going to be really, really stretched. This side then is going to have to crunch, which allows your hip bones to be here, which means your legs would be kind of more in that range, right? And even as horrible as this stick figure, guys, that just feels a little more natural to have this kind of crunch on this side and this stretch on the other. And you can do that whether you're moving forwards or backwards. It doesn't matter, however you bend, one side is stretched, one is crunched, and it's almost always in the guts. You'll very rarely see an actual physical bend in the rib cage. It's not impossible, but for the sake of this class, pretend it's impossible. So, ignore my way cool little stick figure guy. Let's erase him real quick. He doesn't need to exist anymore. No, he's gone. Okay, so he lost his stick figure family. So here's our way cool rib cage. And then we went through and we started talking about some other bones in the human body, right? We talked about that clavicle, which kind of sits in two parts, kind of 1 and 2, just like so. We talked about how there's a sternum in here somewheres, and then your spinal column is kind of down here, almost like a path of action, right? Kind of going right down from the top of your head, down through your spine, all the way down to your core, right? That's kind of where we stop. What I want to do is add on a couple little tidbits here and there, and I'm going to be surprised. I'm willing to bet you guys probably know some of these muscles already, because you all look like you hit the gym quite often. I know I do. This is in fact a no-flex zone, but it's really hard for me not to, because see, I hit the gym, so
Please continue.
Okay, all right, just keep teaching. Okay, so what we're gonna do is kind of strap this guy up here. We're gonna give him some muscles on top. So first, let's start out. We've got kind of the two big muscles on top, and these muscles are the exact same, male or female across the board. We've got these two kind of up front here that kind of sit and kind of roll into our armpits just a little bit. What's neat, maybe you never necessarily thought about this before, but literally like the front of your armpit, which is kind of gross, I'm holding it right now. The front of your armpit is this particular muscle. Like, it's not like your armpit is something separate. It's just the muscle kind of stretching up and over a little bit on your shoulders right there. Do you guys know the name of these two muscles?
Pectorals.
Yeah, pectorals, right? Absolutely. Like I said, a lot of these muscles you're going to know already. So these are called our pecs, or pectorals. Okay, done. Let's keep moving on down the list here. Next, I know these are part of the arm, but your pectorals kind of slowly but surely kind of connect right up in here. So right about here, they kind of roll up into the top part of your shoulder, kind of like big old shoulder pads of muscle. Do you guys know what those muscles are called? Right there, up top. If you do a lot of this thing, you'd work them out. No? Okay. So these are called our deltoids. Delts. Right, those are our deltoids. Okay? So we got our pecs and our deltoids. And again, I know those are arms. We'll get more into arms next lesson. But for right now, just kind of know that they're in there somewhere. Then, finally, if someone's ever given you a back massage and it just felt really relaxing, kind of, right, feels so good. What they're really massaging is a muscle. It kind of starts right around over here, kind of wraps around the back side of your neck, kind of wraps up and down over here. Have you ever seen some like crazy big like muscle workout dude and they like don't have a neck anymore? It's just this big pile of muscles and they're like, I can lift anything. Right, that person? That was a good impersonation. That muscle right there. Do you guys know what that muscle is? This kind of right here. It's kind of a triangle shape. Okay, that's cool. So this is called our trapezius or our traps. I'll give you one clue what kind of music they're into. It's trap music. You see, no? So I'm trying. I'm trying. Come on. It's fourth period. We got to get through somehow, right? All right, so we've got our pecs. Bam. We've got our delts. Kapow. We got our trapezios. And again, those traps, what's neat about those is they actually just kind of start right about here, right above your clavicle. Kind of wraps up and around. That's that thing that you get a back massage for. And kind of just gracefully kind of hooks up into the scapula, those shoulder blades. So there's all that. That's kind of our upper torso deck right there. Then kind of going down the torso, we've got our abdominals, right? And of course, we're all rocking a classic six-pack. The reason that, of course, you have these six-packs, right? Here's kind of our pecs again, kind of rippling down a little bit. But our first row of abdominals is kind of this triangular shape right here, kind of slices down the middle, kind of basically fills in the gap of those pectorals. Then it slowly comes down yonder and kind of starts to taper just a little bit, like so. I'm just going to slice them up a little bit. He kind of looks like a Ninja Turtle. But we've got this kind of six-pack. Those are obviously not anatomically correct, but it's a good idea for placement. Let's be honest, we're drawing clothes models. We're never going to need to draw somebody's abs, but it's still good to know where they're at. Finally, on the side, right? So we've got these muscles running down the side. I've got muscles going across the top, but I've got nothing on the side, right? So all this side stuff here, those are connected together with what are called our obliques. Obliques. So your obliques kind of rest all up in here. Now there's some more muscles obviously going down, but we'll get to those whenever we get into the hip. So we've got our abs and our obliques. Right? So, trapezius, pectoral, deltoid, oblique, and abs. Now, this is by no means a health class. I'm not asking you to memorize like crazy Latin names or anything, but this is, of course, just basic information to get across. Coolio? Awesome. So, we now have a better comprehension of the skeletal structure, a better comprehension of the muscular structure, and I'm just going to tuck this guy in the corner so he can stare at us. Okay. So, I know, right? It's the things of your nightmares. So, there's all that. We good with this? Cool? Excellent. All right, so goodbye. Okay, next, we've got this fella over here. So if you've ever seen a Greek sculpture, an Italian sculpture, even a neoclassical sculpture from like America, right? If you've ever seen these kind of sculptures, there's a couple things to think about with them. First off, just first and foremost, Fun fact for you, maybe you guys do or don't know this, the ancient Greek sculptures were not actually this kind of white-looking marble. They were carved that way, but they were carved out of white because they were originally painted on top. They would have had a fresh coat of paint on top of them. It's easy to kind of forget that sometimes whenever you see any kind of sculpture, that it was almost meant to look like this, and it's not. This is war-torn, weather-blasted, just slowly over years and decades and centuries, that paint has chipped away, and all that's left is the marble. But there is, in fact, at least initially, a lot of these were meant to have some kind of paint on them. Not all of them, of course, but most of them. But you'll notice that a lot of these sculptures, again, Italian, Greek sculptures, tend to have a certain particular kind of look to them. All the poses tend to look kind of the same. There's a reason for that. So there's this Italian word that's called contrapposto, and it literally translates over to kind of the counter posture, right? The posture that you're posing in, right? This counter pose, right? So what we're going to do here real quick is I'm going to kind of help you guys analyze this a little bit. The idea is you want to think about kind of crosses across the body, different limbs, right? At the same time, you also want to think about, get rid of that, you also want to imagine that there's a line going through the shoulders, a line going through the hips, and preferably a line going through the head as well, but the shoulders and the hips are the important ones. Now imagine for a second, first things first, to get a good pose, whenever you guys are standing on our little platform kind of stage over there, whenever you're standing on that platform stage, you, a lot of times it's hard to think about like what pose you're going to do, or you're kind of standing there like a bum and you're thinking like, well, I don't know what to do, I'm not sure. Well, what happens, what happens here is I'm going to give you some suggestions, right? First thing is this, whenever you're taking a pose, and we're going to do this in a second, first just kind of do something with your feet, right? So, done, okay? So they're not just perfectly parallel, that's boring. Next, pick a hip to kind of rest on. So we're going to take our hips, this line through our hips, and kind of put the weight on one hip or another. It doesn't really matter which one you pick, but a little bit of weight. You can tell what that does is it makes one leg perfectly straight and allows the other leg to kind of bend a little bit, right? So it gives it a little bit more of a dynamic posture. You're kind of, popping out your hip a little bit of swagger. That's not a bad thing. So what that also does by kind of popping the hip out is it slightly twists the spine just ever so slightly. That gives it a little bit more of a dynamic pose. And finally, we want to take our shoulders here, and we want to rotate our shoulders just a little bit, right? So for example, notice that I've kind of got this V shape going on, almost like a sideways kind of V going on, right? So this hip is up, that means this shoulder goes down, right? So there's a little bit of a squeeze. And again, like we talked about, that means that this side becomes squeezed, this side becomes stretched. We can do the same thing in reverse, of course, right? It doesn't really matter which way you go, but if I can lower this shoulder and pop this hip, or vice versa, it causes a pinch and a stretch, and again, that just looks a little more aesthetically beautiful. Other things that we can do, on top of having this kind of V shape going on, we can also think about rotation as well. So for example, if maybe my legs are facing head on, maybe I rotate the chest so it bends ever so slightly, and I rotate the head so it bends ever so slightly, right? So now I'm getting a little bit more three-dimensional. This helps more in sculpture, but it looks good in the drawing too. So if my hips, let's say, are facing this way, I can twist my chest, so now my torso is facing this way. Maybe I keep that rotation going with my head over here. This feels more like a model pose, right? As opposed to like, right? This looks like a horrible school photo. Or maybe, did you ever have like the school photos where like you're sitting there and it like force your body this way, and then, okay, now look at the camera, you're like, why am I doing this, right? And then having like, now tilt your head, and you're like, what's happening, right? Do you ever have that happen, right? They always make you like take the most uncomfortable pose in the world, right?
Like I look weird.
But you always feel like you look weird, right? Well, what you're really doing, what they're doing is this contrapposto. What they're trying to do is find a way of kind of like, okay, we're going to give your head a little bit of a rotation, right? Here's kind of your head, right? And you're oh so happy for those school photos. We give your head a little bit of a rotation, right? Then we rotate your body a little bit, right? So what if I kind of rotate the body? And then we're going to give you always have to have that like hand right underneath your chin, like you're just really, puzzled. Okay, all right. So that looks like a school photo if I ever saw one, right there. Give me a copy. I'll send it to grandma, right? Right. Every school photo ever. So again, it's this contrapposto. It's this idea of kind of making these angles, right? Kind of twisting things, getting a little bit of a twist in there, right? Straight, making sure you have one leg that has all the weight, one leg that's more bent, and finally think about again that kind of cross across the body, right? So for example, if we've got one leg that's bent, you want to bend one arm as well. It can go either way here. Maybe if I have one that is perfectly straight, then I want to have the other one that's perfectly straight as well, right? So I'm adding this dynamic pose. It's not just like my arms are like dangling from my torso for no reason, right? Instead, I'm going to kind of, okay, let's see, place my feet, okay? Take the hip to, okay, hip, there's my weight on my one hip. I'm going to crunch, right? So you have a little bit of crunch, a little bit of stretch. Then let's see, what if I went across the body and bend this arm, like so? Sure, I'll just toss it there. And this arm just kind of dangles around. Now I've got a dynamic pose. It's awkward for me to take, but it's interesting to draw, as opposed to, right, really boring to draw. Cool? Cool, okay. So, bam, one more thing down. All right, next up, we've got one last thing to talk about, and then it's drawing for the rest of the day. We'll add them so they can all sit down there and stare at us awkwardly. All right, so finally, we've got this lady here. She's taking her pose. So here's the thing. What I want to focus on today, is this idea of twisting the torso, right? We talked last class, again, about how, if I've got kind of this rib cage, that's horrible, but if I've got this rib cage here, the spine kind of comes down, my guts are kind of here, and I can imagine there's kind of one, and I can take this same two, this same kind of direction, right? I can even take this same direction here, this same, measurement, right? Here's one, here's two. I can take this same measurement and go up, and that's about how big my head should be. It kind of goes off the page right there. We'll get into the size of heads in our next class. But I know already that there is half ribs in my torso and half guts, right? But what happens whenever, again, we're doing contrapposto? What happens if someone takes some crazy twist or bend in their posture, like this girl is here? Well, what you can do is this. I want you to really focus, just like we did for the human face, right? We thought about the front of the face versus the side of the face, the top of the nose versus the side of the nose. Thinking in 3 dimensions is way more important than thinking in detail, right? I don't care if you can draw a hyper-detailed eyeball. I care, does that eyeball look 3-dimensional? Does it look more in reality, whether or not it's got eyelashes or not, right? So the same thing goes for her. I'm going to ignore her arms for a second, but you can tell she's got this really tight twist on her body, right? So what we're going to do is this. Instead of trying to draw her, right, because again, we're not really focused on detail, we're focused on 3 dimensions. Instead of drawing her, I'm going to sit down and I'm actually going to think about 2 cubes. That's it, 2 cubes, just like 2-point perspective, right? I'm going to think to myself, okay, well, I can see, I can see kind of her shoulder right here, something like that. I can see just a hint of her back, kind of right about there, right? This comes up, and there's kind of her other shoulder. So that would be, if her top torso is kind of a cube, that's about the rotation of that cube would be, right? Then I can come down to her lower torso here where all, your guts and intestines and fun stuff are. And that, again, I see a little, just a shred, just a hint of her back, kind of comes across and kind of back over again. Now, obviously, not perfect cubes, right? But what that allows me to do is this. I'm going to switch my color here real quick. What that allows me to do is this. I can now see visually, right? I can now see, there's the back side, right? I'll color in this one too. There's the back side. Okay, let's grab another color, my marker's off, right? I can now see there's the front side. And this is all, excuse me, the kind of the side, excuse me, not the front, the side. Just like so. So I can see the back and the side. And again, I kind of end up with this kind of 2-point perspective cube. Then I got the top here, of course. And if I wanted to, we could sit down and start kind of fleshing out where the face and the eyes and the nose and all that kind of good stuff. Her arm kind of jettisons out from there. But what's neat is this, I can remove her, of course, and still have that same level of 3-dimensionality. Now, obviously, she looks like a weird robot, right? We've got a top box and a lower box, and that's the end of it, right? But I can now think about these 2 cubes kind of twisting and rotating in space, and that twist allows me to see more 3-dimensional. It's going to take very little effort for me. I'm going to grab black here for a second. It's going to take very little effort for me to grab, to grab my pen and kind of go through and just smooth this stuff out, right? Okay, so this is her rib cage, kind of comes down around, this curves out, just like so. Her front kind of curves, and there's her hips, right? And now I can end up with something that feels a little more realistic just by smoothing those lines out, right? So I can help see it a little bit differently, right? So whenever you're drawing someone, even someone with a crazy pose, try your best to stay away from just simply trying to outline it, right? Okay, well, here's her back, and here's her front, her arm comes up here, and her head's over here, I guess, and she's really happy, and she's holding a sword that somehow gets over her head. I'm not quite sure, right? Instead of trying to do these outlines, do not do the outlines. They aren't helping you, right? Instead, think about these 3-dimensional cubes. I'd much rather she look like a 3-dimensional robot than I would her look like a 2-dimensional cartoon. Cool? If those are our options. Cool? Okay. So, for the rest of the day today, what we're going to work on is practice, right? I want you to specifically focus Whereas last class I let you kind of pick and choose. This class I want you to specifically focus on that kind of torso area. You're going to draw more if you want to draw legs and arms, but really you don't need to. What I want you to focus on instead is thinking about the rotation of these cubes. And what I'm going to do to make your life even easier is I'm going to have somebody pose. I'm going to take these cubes right here. I've got these kind of just square cardboard boxes. That's all they are. Right? And they're the exact same size, exact same everything. What we're going to do is this. Whenever someone poses, I'm literally going to rotate these to match. The lower box will be kind of their guts, their hips, right? The upper box will be their rib cage. I'm going to let these boxes match their pose, and that way you can literally see what it would look like if it's made out of a box as opposed to what they look like in real life. If you want, literally just draw the boxes. Like, don't even draw the figure, just draw the boxes. Get comfortable seeing the front versus the side, right? Then slowly migrate over to the figure. Let that really sink into your brain. By the end of class, if all you figured out is that you can see the front of the torso versus the side of the torso, then you've accomplished everything you need to for today's class, right? That's really today's big key, is seeing the front versus the side. Just like the human face. If you can do that, then all of a sudden you can see in 3 dimensions, and that's the hardest part, okay? Cool? All right, so if you haven't already, get out the sketchbooks. We're drawing for the rest of the day. Let's make it happen.